the strategy session, getting inspiration from our new reality session for the LEAP 2020 virtual conference powered by the advisors at Mahdlo. I'm Craig Oldham, and today I'm joined by Shay Phillips, Assistant Vice President, Corporate Strategy at AT&T. AT&T Communications provides more than 100 million U.S. customers with entertainment and communications experiences across TV, mobile, and broadband. Plus, it serves high-speed, highly secure connectivity and smart solutions to nearly 3 million business customers. Welcome, Shay. I'm also joined by Beth Van Story, partner and CMO at Chief Outsiders, a fractional CMO firm working with mid-market and private equity organizations to operationalize their vision. Beth, welcome. As well as Cindy Towers, she is the co-founder and CEO of Juris Solutions, a company dedicated to making a difference in the way corporations, law firms, and government agencies find and utilize top legal talent to drive innovative and value-driven legal solutions. Welcome, Cindy. Welcome, everybody. So we wanted to start out this session, and you know, it's kind of surprising because a lot of folks don't think, and business leaders don't think, that you can find inspiration in your planning process, which tends to be very, you know, process driven and rote. But you know, and we've got some experts here to try to flesh that out on how you begin to do that and get inspiration from planning and strategy. So I was struck by this article in the Harvard Business Review this last week that said among large firms doing business during the past 4 economic downturns, that 14% of them were able to increase both their sales growth rate and their margins, which I felt was kind of interesting, right? You kind of think everybody's in the same boat, we're all collapsing together, but what we're going to do today is let's try to unpack a little bit of that secret sauce and how those 14% of those companies kind of grew. So my first question to you guys is, let's just take a step back because we're in an unprecedented year. We've got a pandemic. We're in an election year, which is normally just disruptive anyway. But I'd like to get your sense, you know, of how your business has kind of changed this last year and what have been some of the biggest impacts. And Beth, can we start with you?
Sure. So my firm works primarily with mid-market companies. And what we found is when COVID first hit, there was a lot of panic. We had people who put us on hold. We typically work on a retainer basis. And there was a little bit of a panic that set in. But then people quickly began regrouping in their companies, trying to figure out what do we need to do. And so we did a survey in late June, and over 60% of the mid-market CEOs that we surveyed said that they were focusing now on new products and new markets. So with that going on, our phones have started ringing again, and our business has actually come back very, very strongly because people are taking this time where they're not spending time commuting, going to trade shows, going to conferences, and they're trying to figure out, okay, where else can we go? And so they're looking for people like us, for strategy and marketing consultants, to help them figure out where their next opportunities are.
That's awesome. That's good news. I mean, it's glad to see that's happening. Cindy, how about your business? You're in a very different business, although I guess you could say a little bit of consulting, but also in the legal space, right? So how have you guys been impacted last year?
Yeah, so it's, I mean, we've been impacted from everything from physical, right? So our people, process, and technology, right? That's been affected. So we thought our continuity plan had everything locked down, but we had to make some, you know, significant tweaks for our internal people. We were able to provide secure environments for our lawyers to work for our clients, but we had forgotten about us. So we had to make some infrastructure changes, and our clients are changing, and the supply chain is changing. So I, you know, people laugh at me when I say supply chain in connection with human capital, but it is your supply chain. And I say that because the folks that are listening to this program, their supply chain may not be human capital, but it doesn't matter what you're in. You really need to look at your feeders. And so for us, we had a significant population of very high level, very subject matter expert type of attorney become very open, willing to try contingency gig work, right? Because the gig economy already started that dialogue. So our talent pool is different, and it's been incredible. And our clients' needs are different. So, a year ago, something may have been in vogue, but right now, we are looking for bankruptcy lawyers, right? We're looking for, anybody who's got patent and trademarks for the marketing stuff that's now going all remote. And of course, employment law. Those are really hot topics and hot button issues for our clients. And so that's what's important today. So we're really been affected in a number of ways, and so have our clients.
You're in one of those lucky businesses, I guess you could say. This year we've got that inverse relationship. when the market's down, you're up, and your supply and demand are up. So that's fantastic. Congratulations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We're going to come back to more on how you're planning for that. So Shay, so let's take it from a big corporate view, and how are you seeing it? You work with a lot of businesses. What are you seeing out in the marketplace?
As we work with businesses, the main thing we see is that they're taking this opportunity to really accelerate how they transform their business and think about moving into new markets, especially if their traditional revenue streams have been impacted by the pandemic. And so where before they may have been slower to make decisions to maybe open themselves up to new technologies or move from like old legacy products to newer technologies like maybe fiber, now they want to do that even quicker, especially when you consider that their workforce is much more virtual. So now their needs are even greater to be able to support that. The other thing that we notice, and not just with clients, but within our own business, is that I think we all underestimate the value of what I call the drive-by decision. So when you're co-located and you catch someone in the elevator or catching coffee or during lunch, you can a lot of times get work done during those little 5-minute increments. Well, that doesn't happen when you're virtual. And so that really requires a couple of things, businesses to do a couple of things differently. So number one, it really requires them to empower their workforce, because accessibility becomes somewhat of an issue in terms of, leaders become somewhat of a bottleneck in order to get decisions made. And so you have to empower the people to get work done. The second thing is really looking at your collaboration tools and the things that you give your people access to so that they can get to you or get to each other so that they can work in a collaborative way, because now they're virtual. And then I would say the third thing is the strategy has to be so much more clear than before, because again, if you're going to empower people to make decisions, they have to understand what they're making decisions about and what the goals are. And so those are some of the big changes that we've seen and the things that we're trying to help customers do.
Absolutely. And you bring up a good point, Shay. So when you look at this, and there was a McKinsey study that was done, I think maybe last month, around this idea of how many people are actually going to return to work. And obviously there are certain industries and sectors like hospitality and travel that require you to be there. But they were saying that in their survey, only 28% of people that worked in an office were actually going to return. So to your point, right? That really affects how you plan for the next year, right? And so, Shay, when you think about that, how is your planning process, and how are you seeing planning processes change? I mean, are people just abandoning plans and winging it? Are they planning for contingencies? What are you seeing?
Well, I mean, we're definitely not winging it. And I would hope that any business, no matter how big or how small, they're not winging it. I think a lot more companies are open to doing business in what they would have considered non-traditional ways before, as this is just how we're going to go to market. And they're viewing this as much more efficient ways. But then I think the key is, I think Beth was mentioning before how people were spending a lot of time commuting and building relationships. And so in addition to how do you functionally structure your company and your people, there's kind of what I'll call the softer skill of how do you also build relationships in these kind of non-traditional ways versus the way like salespeople used to do it. And so companies are really trying to figure out how to build those two things together. So physically, how do I build build my company, my spaces, tooling to support that, and then also how do I leverage relationships so that I can continue to grow my business going forward.
No, absolutely. It's a very good point. And so, Cindy, can you build on that for us? I mean, you've got supply chain coming up, you've got demand, a growth company. How are you guys changing your processes?
Well, to Shay's point, I mean, that was the infrastructure change we had to make. I mean, we are a very collaborative organization. We are very team oriented. And so that was a huge challenge. So we had to really, select and build an infrastructure very quickly for ourselves. And so that's, amen to that. I mean, that's a really critical thing, because if you can't instant message and you can't get a hold of somebody, you're going to be affected. That's in addition to the psychological impact of a lot of workers being home alone. Unfortunately, I have 3 teenagers that I live with, but some folks are not as fortunate as I am. And, it's really the social aspect is critical. And that water cooler, I mean, that was just a perfect example that she gave, talking to someone in an elevator. You're getting work done and you don't even realize it. And so you're overscheduled because you're now scheduling. So asymmetrical meetings have really helped us. And you need software to do that. The other things that we've done is, for better or for worse, I'm not traveling, right? And I used to travel. I mean, last September, this past September, I would have been on the road 20 out of 30 days. So we schedule around that, and things tend to move a little slower. So we are talk about accelerating, or Shay mentioned accelerating our growth. We are bringing things to market and doing initiatives that we couldn't have done before because I was the cog in the wheel. And so I'm around, and the third thing I would say is the opportunities there, because one thing the pandemic did is it took us out of our office buildings, but it also broke down some walls, right? When you're in chaos, right? Status quo beats mediocrity, and stress and challenge, right, breeds heroes and champions and innovation. And so people are ready for it. The things that we might have been a little apprehensive about doing, we're like, let's go for it, right? Because the world's ready. So those are our changes.
So would you count yourself in the 28% of people that are going to return to work for the most part? Are you split it up?
Yeah. In terms of our internal core staff, our internal operations, more likely than not, we won't. Our team feels pretty strongly about that. Who knows? I think we have 10,000 square feet of beautiful office space in a city overlooking, Billy Penn and City Hall. It's only been in this new space for a year. We would, maybe repurpose it and think differently. How can we use it? How can we, still give people the flexibility and the ability to work from home and still stay productive, but also have the ability to do office. But I don't think we're going to go back to the way we were.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, your office sounds beautiful, so I'm gonna fill out an application after this. Beth, and you
plenty of room now.
Well, you're looking at my always office. I'm always remote.
Always remote.
Occasionally, I have a local client, but typically my clients are far away. But I'll talk about 2 things. I mean, first, what we've done as a firm is we've taken this time. We have tried to look at how can we make our business and our CMOs, because we've got almost 70 CMOs in our company, and make them more efficient. So we've taken some of this time and downtime a little bit to productize some of our offerings and drive more consistency. We've also taken a different approach to engaging with clients. So in many cases, we're starting with a smaller engagement than we might have started with before, but we're already seeing some of those grow into larger engagements. But it has been a change. People are a little more cautious about spending money. And so we're finding we start with a smaller project can be kind of helpful to them. Another thing is that we usually have regional meetings once a year, and it's a day and a half. We all gather in one place. In fact, Cindy, I think this year was supposed to be Philly, which I was excited about because I can drive there. but we're not doing that this year. So people can't sit for hours on end on Zoom. So instead of having a day and a half where we're all together, we're going to have some couple hours of sessions over a few different days. And we'll each be participating in things like this, where each of us will lead something. Now, let's talk about the client side. So from the client side, it really breaks down differently depending on the industry, and even if you're B2B versus B2C. So, B2C, you have to think a lot about what has been the impact financially and life-wise on the consumer, and what does that mean for their ability and willingness to buy your products, and even their interest. So obviously, travel and a few others have been hit hard. Some restaurants, sort of in the middle market, were able to pivot and do curbside pickup and delivery. Fine dining restaurants have been a little more challenged in that area. If we talk about B2B, the whole way of selling has completely changed. There are not trade shows, and trade shows don't translate. You can't just take a typical trade show and conference and plop it online on Zoom. People just can't sit for that long. And there's really a few different elements, right? When you go to a conference or a trade show, there's the educational piece, which is fairly easy to do on Zoom, but you have to keep the segments a little shorter, and you've got to add an entertainment component to them. You just can't have talking heads. It's got to have more video and graphics and things that will keep people's interest, and it's got to move fast. The second piece is the networking. Well, networking is pretty hard to do online. There are a couple companies out there that have some platforms for helping to do that, but it's much more challenging in a remote world. And then the third piece is the product discovery. And this is where you're working the trade show floor. You've spent a lot of money on a booth. You've sent a whole pile of people there. That's gone. So how do you do that in an economic way, whether it's webinars or demos, group demos, recorded demos can be quite helpful as well. But the B2B customer that relied heavily on the trade show world, they've had to rethink everything. So those are a few of the things that we've noticed.
Yeah. And that's really insightful, Beth. And when you think about this, it's really the really hard thing to do as a business owner is to realize that you need to change, especially if you're making money, right? As everybody here on the panel said. So how do you take in the new reality and see beyond your current reality? And I think of the example of Apple, right? And we're seeing that transformation before our eyes. They're not an iPod company anymore. They're not an iPhone company anymore. They're moving to a services company. And, all along the way, went from basically almost shutting down when Steve Jobs came back to becoming a $2 trillion company or wherever they are today. So how do we kind of model that behavior to kind of force ourselves to think about that new reality? And maybe this is a good time to do that. Beth, any insights on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think another interesting story from the news this past week, Craig, was Pepsi.
Yeah.
And if you look at product lifecycle management, they reached a point, and I don't know if it was a wake-up call because of COVID or if they had time to actually think about their products and their portfolio, but they've purged, I want to say it was 169 products, and there's some brands that are very well known. I mean, Tab, which has been their brand for years, a couple that they got through acquisition, Odwalla, Zico coconut water. So, there's an example of a really big company having to rethink their reality and say, you know what? These products are less than 1% of our portfolio. What is the cost to us of maintaining these products? And they reached the conclusion that this is not the future of the company. Let's shed these. At this point, there's so little revenue that they're a distraction. And then we can focus on, okay, what's the innovation? What's the future of the beverage category and beverage tastes and beverage trends among consumers? And so I think that was an interesting one, just to kind of take a look in the mirror at what do you have, where are you? And it's that, I forget who said it, but what got you here won't get you there.
Yeah. Right.
Now's a great time to be taking that approach to your business and saying, what got you here won't get you there.
Yeah, exactly. It's the saying, it's not the fear of falling, it's the fear of jumping, right? And so when you think about that, Cindy, how are you guys utilizing this time? And I know you said you're taking a lot of time, reevaluating. How are you guys thinking about changing your model?
So, you know, we were a startup, right? We're 20 years in the making, and we have been to this, change juncture before, right? That's how you get there. And where we are now, interestingly enough, we had started a strategic plan only a few months before COVID hit. And what the people that are a lot smarter than me that we've hired to help us with these processes have always said, look at two things, right? One, what is your why, right? What are you about as an organization? And always stay true to that and measure within that. And two, what's going on in the lives of your clients and the consumer? And so if you look at the world, right? So when our supply chain is people, but our client base is corporate America. And you look at all of that, and then you look at our why, where we are spending a lot of our time, and we'll be launching 8 months in advance of its original launch date, a new service line dedicated to moving the needle in diversity in law. Law has, the practice of law, hadn't changed for 200 years. 2007, there was a little bit of a push, right? We had a little bit of a change up, and now the world is changing so fast, but the numbers aren't moving inside of law. And so we've taken a lot of our expertise and we have built that as a way, as a program in order to bring into organizations a way for them to, move the needle by what is important to them. And so it's been a really exciting time for us because it's something that is so important to our why. I spend a lot of my free time in that space, and now we're able to look and say, hey, the world's ready. We can now create something, leverage all of our relationships and our contacts and our people, and take this out for a spin. So we're really excited about that. And the other is back to what Shay was saying earlier, the need for community. We have a large pool of talent that really, it's so important to build these communities. So we're really working on our engagement side of the house, having communities come together and have these things take a life of their own outside of the actual legal work that they perform. So those are two ways we are taking this time to reinvent and progress.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I know you progressively think about that and how to get better as a founder, not just tangibly, how do you grow revenue, but how do you change your process to kind of have these breakthroughs, right? And revenue barriers. So that's Cindy's on it. Shay, AT&T, obviously, if I would have given your introduction, it would have been the #1 phone company in the world, Obviously, there's a lot of things transforming with AT&T and the businesses that you work with. How are you seeing them kind of be able to stretch their legs a little bit, think about things differently?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that, and I don't know, you probably didn't listen to our earnings call this morning, but I did. But I think the biggest thing we're focused on is, what is it that we really want to be known for, and then focus on, what fits into that realm. And so when I think about that, essentially it means a certain amount of simplification and understanding that we want to do certain things really, really well and be the best at those things. And it always reminds me of a saying that I had when I was running an operations team. And so I used to say that customization is the enemy of scale, meaning that, you can't be like the very best and perform at the highest peak if you're trying to do 1,000 things. And so it's the same thing, like, we're about connecting our customers and doing it in the best possible way. And so that means that we have to really be thoughtful about all the different things that we've done before and make really, decisions about if those are things that make sense for us to continue to do or not.
No, That's really smart. You know, it's really interesting that you say that, coming from a really big, large corporate environment, that you're trying to simplify things because your growth really wasn't spurred by all the processes you have, right? And I think sometimes when you look at mid-market companies, they can get a little twisted up thinking that that's how you grow, is by having more structure and process, right? But as you're here to attest, that's not the case. So I love that lesson in there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it goes back to the comment that Beth talked about in terms of simplifying the portfolio of soft drinks, right? It's the same thing. It's the amount of resources, both monetarily, from a technology standpoint, and just people that you put behind things that have very little return is huge. And so, this skill and discipline of, life cycle management and of really assessing the success of every single thing that you're doing is so important, so that you can reinvest those resources into growth and the next big thing, are critical for companies, all companies, big and small.
I love it. I love it. All right. So we're going to switch gears. We're going to go into lightning round. So for the folks that are listening, really tangible tips, right? So I want you to, off the top of your head, give me a couple of tips for people, right? So when you think about the top 2 ideas or methods to really get some people to think about transformation, how do you get your peers in your organization on board? What are your top 2 kind of go-to tips and tricks? Beth, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, well, I'm a strategy consultant, so I'm gonna go with a couple typical approaches, but maybe with a different twist. So the first is going to be a SWOT: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I think here the focus has to be on opportunities and threats, and that means outside of your company, what is going on in the market. If you do not really understand what's going on in the market with your competitors, with your customers, with market economics, your suppliers, nothing you do is going to work. Then you bring it internally and say, okay, what are our strengths and weaknesses given that environment? And we like to do what we call an activated SWOT, which is take each of those areas: strengths, weaknesses, threats, opportunities, and look at them and then say, well, what are you going to do about that? Based on if this is a threat, what actions are you going to take to try to minimize that threat? My second approach would be what I call the clean sheet of paper. And this is where you throw everything out the window and you just say, okay, if we were to start a company in this space today, forget about everything we've done in the past. Let's take a clean sheet of paper out. And how would we do that? And some examples of companies that did that were JetBlue. They did that back in the day. And Tesla. Tesla completely disrupted the typical the structure of the automotive industry, of distribution in automotive. So you have to be brave. One is jumping off the low dive, the other is jumping off the high dive, but I think both of them can be helpful. And then finally, of course, I wouldn't be a good strategy consultant if I didn't say it can help to have an outside facilitator, whether that's a strategy consultant, whether it's an EOS implementer, but sometimes it's hard to get out of your own way of thinking, and it can be helpful. If people are in Vistage groups, that's a great way to get other people to help think about your business and think about the problems you face. So not exactly lightning, but those are my thoughts, Craig.
Thank you. Hey, Cindy, so as the top person at your organization, you're progressively thinking about things. We know that already. How are you getting everybody on board?
So if you ask anybody in the organization, right, they're going to tell you that I've probably uttered these words more than they like to hear, and that is, we don't want to be Kodak. And I say that often. And, the story of Kodak is just, they were on it. They had digital in their hands since the 70s, but they couldn't see past film. And so that's where we always start in terms of rallying the troops. But our why is to make a difference. And so everybody, every day, ask themselves, how can we make a difference? And sometimes you have to realize how we're making a difference yesterday isn't the way we have to make a difference today. And so we have to change. And it really, as we have grown as an organization and we've become more self-aware, our hiring is more in line, right, with our value system. And so at this juncture, most people, it's not too hard to rally the troops, right? Because they think like we do. Their why is the same. Nobody comes in and says, well, I just want to make a buck today and, and call it a day. That's not who we are. And there are some initiatives where they'll laugh. I mean, it'll be an initiative that makes zero money for us, but it goes to our why. And I have guaranteed that somehow, some way it will come back to us, and it always does. And I think the team believes that. So that's my little tidbit for how we do it. And best points, I just want to repeat them. They were all outstanding, and the consultants have all told me that. So yes, hire an outside consultant as well. And this is good too.
And I love your approach, because if you look at even the most successful, sports analogies, I love, because they're just kind of these microcosms of business teams, right? And they have to perform at high levels, and the results kind of come very quickly. And I always go for this piece where Bill Walsh said, he doesn't necessarily draft the best players, but he drafts players that will play well together. So I applaud you there for that, Cindy. A lot of people don't realize it. Yeah, absolutely.
Critical.
Jay, how do you move the machine?
Yeah, that's funny you call it a machine, because sometimes it can be just that. I think the biggest thing for me, and I've been in a lot of situations where I have to convince people to do things that sometimes they don't want to do, is to first and foremost understand why people don't want to change. And it usually has something to do with some type of emotional attachment to the thing that you want them to change. And what I find is that if the person who is in the position where you need them to say yes to the change, if they're the person who was the one who launched it or originally did it, they're the hardest to convince to make a difference. And I think what I try to do first and foremost is really to appeal to the fact that because we're changing doesn't mean that you didn't do a great job. So really recognizing what they did and giving them props for that, and then helping them understand how the work that they did is the foundation for the next thing that we need to go and do. So transformation doesn't mean that what we are doing today is bad. It just means that it's a springboard for the next thing that we should go do. And so it's really just kind of understanding people's hesitancy to make those changes, and helping them understand how they can be part of the next great thing. You were part of the last great thing, and you can play a pivotal role in the next great thing. And then the second thing that I always use as a strategy is I like to have a devil's advocate in the room. Like, I am not a fan of groupthink at all. I think it is like the worst thing you can ever do, especially when you're trying to transform your company. And I'm a bit of a risk taker. So whenever there's a decision in front of me, I do this crazy thing that says, is this a 5% problem or a 95% problem? And depending on that answer, it determines how much time I'm going to allocate to trying to fix the problem. And it doesn't mean that I don't go back to 5% problems, but it just means that I'm not going to spend 2 hours on it. And so those are a couple of things that I do as we're trying to drive change in the business. But people are always the hardest part of driving change. Process is easy if you can get people aligned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. You have to hit people emotionally, right, to get them to change, so they can see that. I love that. Be a part of the next great thing. Everybody wants to be great. So, so let's shift gears a little bit. Second question for you guys. Remember, it's lightning round. So we have to make time for commercial breaks. How are you reallocating, or how are you seeing budgets being reallocated? We talked a lot today about, okay, we're not traveling, we're not doing trade shows. What are you doing with the money? Are you reinvesting it? Are you putting it in people? Shay, what are you seeing happening in the marketplace?
I definitely see people reallocating. And I think it's a combination of people and process and technology. So we talked a little bit about having to keep people engaged and to create cultures where people collaborate differently. So you're seeing investment in that. But certainly, as businesses transform, you have to invest in technology to drive efficiencies, because now you have different models. Maybe your revenue streams are pressured. And so we're seeing a lot of investment in that. And customers are just really looking for help to understand how can they get their business to grow as, you know, their consumers change their habits and their behavior. So there's a lot of movement happening.
I gotcha. That makes sense. Cindy, you said you're not traveling anymore. What are you doing with all that millions that you're saving?
Well, if you ask my CFO, she's going to tell you I'm spending it. But the truth is, we are investing. So a lot of the things Shay mentioned, investing in technology, we're investing in people, but we are also earmarking some of it for the rainy day. We are a very, very cash heavy organization. I have a very large, we have a very large cash demand every week. And we had some scary times, in all candor, when the pandemic hit. Again, our continuity plan allowed for X amount of time of being down. I mean, I'll be honest, pandemic wasn't on my list, right? I mean, we just missed it. We did not think that we would be, in such a transition. And we were one of the fortunate ones because our clients kept our employees and converted remotely as well, which meant great. We were still in business, but I still had to fund the payroll, and people were paying slower. So we got a little bit of a scare there. So we are being a little bit more fiscally responsible. I shouldn't say fiscally responsible. I would suggest we were irresponsible before, but we are being strategic with how much money we are actually spending.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Beth, what are you seeing with your clients?
Yeah, well, first I'll share sort of personally, our CEO, who, likes to say that we drink a lot of cheap wine and expensive coffee because we have a lot of meetings with people. We're not doing that anymore. So, I buy good wine and I have it at home, but I do a lot more phone calls with people. I've got this other group of marketeers that now meets on Friday. We call it marketers in their houses having coffee, and I'm learning a lot. So one of the things I'm doing with my found time is I'm investing it in upskilling myself. And I think a lot of people are doing that, just learning new skills. So that's a big piece of it as well. And then I think with clients, what we're seeing, and again, if I refer back to our CEO survey that we did in June, is people are moving a lot of their action to digital. So a real shift to digital marketing, away from traditional, and of course away from trade shows and things like that. So that's the big one that I see happening.
Got it. So in the last minute that we have here today, give me 2 predictions for next year, Beth, real quick.
Yeah, so I think that the wins will come to people who are open, focused, and brave. So I'll leave you with that.
I love it. Cindy.
Be open, focused, and brave.
Cindy.
My prediction has to do with the real estate. I think the real estate market, we're going to see cities, a lot of office buildings are going to convert to high-rise apartments / condos, and they're all going to have an extra bedroom. The studio is going away because people are going to make room for that home office. And if you were used to buy a 3-bedroom, you're going to get a 4. And so I think we're going to see a lot of conversion to apartment living.
I love it. Jay.
I actually think there's going to be a growth in small businesses in like adjacent spaces, right? So there's, large core businesses, and there's an opportunity for new business models to crop up. And so I think we're just going to see a lot more small businesses, partnering with larger businesses to help support some of these adjacent markets.
Fantastic. I love your predictions. And it has been an absolute privilege for me to be on the panel with such insightful women business leaders. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate you guys making the time today. And for more information about additional sessions at LEAP or any show notes on this session, you can visit www.leap-forward.live. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.